want you to picture something with me for a second. Try to really visualize this, unless you're driving, obviously. Imagine a mask.
A really imposing one.
Right. Not a cheap plastic thing. Something striking, demonic, with these prominent curving horns. But as you look closer at this mask, you realize it isn't solid at all. It's geometric.
Like it's made of all these sharply angled planes.
Yeah, exactly. Almost like a dark, faceted gemstone. And then right before your eyes, the whole thing just shatters.
Splinters apart.
It breaks right down the middle, splitting into these heavy, jagged shards. But they don't fall to the ground. They just hang there, suspended in midair, totally frozen in the middle of their own destruction.
It's a powerful image.
And below the shattering mask is a dark, swirling cosmic sea, just ink and shadow. And glowing faintly way down in the depths of those waves is an intricate, perfectly symmetrical geometric mandala.
That visual is just, it perfectly anchors what we're getting into today.
It really does, because today we are taking a deep dive into the dark night of the soul. And I want to be clear right up front, we are not talking about a vaguely poetic metaphor for, having a bad week at work.
No, not at all.
We're unpacking a highly specific, fiercely psychological alchemical framework from this dense source document titled 41, The Night. The mission for this deep dive is to decode what it actually means to hit spiritual rock bottom.
And why facing those shattered geometric shards of our own identity is the absolute prerequisite for any real breakthrough.
Exactly. So to set the stage, the document actually pulls a quote from Joseph Campbell to frame this whole ordeal.
Yeah, Campbell observed that the dark night of the soul comes just before revelation. The quote is, when everything is lost and all seems darkness, then comes the new life and all that is needed.
Which is such a provocative way to frame it.
It changes the entire paradigm. The darkness isn't a dead end. It's not some cosmic punishment for making a mistake. In this alchemical tradition, the darkness is a sequential necessity.
It's the soil.
Right, it's the fertile soil where revelation actually grows. You have to descend into it and confront your own inner divisions.
And that descent, that trajectory downwards and inwards, the document makes a pretty heavy assertion about it right out of the gate. It suggests that this isn't something that just happens to us. We are naturally inclined towards that which is spiritually harmful.
It sounds incredibly bleak when you first read it.
It does. Are we really hardwired to just seek out our own spiritual ruin?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you observe human behavior without flinching, it's actually an incredibly astute observation. We have this intrinsic gravity pulling us toward the void. Our own decline fascinates us just as much as it hurts us.
I mean, doom scrolling is the perfect modern example of this.
Exactly. Why do we spend 3 hours reading catastrophic news that we know is going to wreck our mental state?
Or rubbernecking at a car crash.
Right. We're drawn to the edge of the cliff, not just out of some survival instinct to step back, but out of this dark, latent curiosity about the fall itself. The darkness isn't an external weather system. It originates inside our own psychology.
It's like we have this saboteur living in the basement. And that brings up the core premise of how this text views the human mind. Because, you wake up in the morning and you feel like one cohesive person.
Most of the time, anyway.
Yeah, you have one name, one ongoing internal monologue. But the argument here is that this singular feeling is a complete illusion. We are intrinsically divided.
Deeply fragmented.
And the source material pulls from two wildly different historical traditions to prove how universal this concept is. It overlays Freud's tripartite model of the psyche directly onto ancient Kabbalistic concepts of the soul.
Which is a fascinating synthesis, because we all know Freud's model, right? The ego, the superego.
The animal instinct fighting the idealistic societal rules.
Exactly, with the poor ego caught in the crossfire just trying to mitigate the disaster. And the text maps that perfectly onto the Kabbalah. Yeah, the nefesh, the animal soul, which is the direct equivalent of the ed, it drives raw physical survival.
And then the neshamah is the spiritual soul, which aligns with that idealistic superego.
Right. And squarely in the middle, playing the role of the stressed-out ego, is the ruach, the intellectual soul. It's the conscious self that is desperately trying to balance the physical animal and the elevated spiritual demands.
It's basically a middle manager.
A very overworked middle manager. And by putting these two systems side by side, the text reinforces that this isn't just modern psychology, it's a fundamental truth of the human condition.
So we have this fragmented ego, the ruach, trying to keep two warring departments from burning down the building. And naturally, the tool we use to manage this chaos is our rational mind.
We try to logic our way out of the division.
Right, we create rules, we make schedules, we build what the text calls a satisfactory model of existence.
Which works perfectly fine for paying your taxes or organizing your calendar.
But the trap snaps shut the second things get dark. The argument is that this rational model completely fails us in the dark night.
It's a vital paradox. This satisfactory model we build is incredibly fragile. The moment the rational mind hits an existential wall line, like profound, meaningless suffering or deep, irrational grief, it just short circuits.
Because it can't solve it like a math equation.
Exactly. It can't process unanswerable questions. So the rational mind tends to dismiss them with vigor and disdain. It calls the irrational silly or illogical. But the truly unsettling part is that the rational mind cannot understand that the suffering it's trying to comprehend is actually compounded by its attempts to understand it.
Let's really pause on that because that runs entirely counter to how we're taught to handle problems. The suffering is compounded by the attempt to understand it rationally.
Yes.
So if you're in the middle of a deep crisis, the absolute thick of the dark night, and you try to spreadsheet your way out of it,
It makes it worse.
you are actively tightening the knot by pulling on the ends.
Because the rational mind is a machine built purely for duality. It requires a good and a bad, a success and a failure, a right and a wrong.
And that constant categorizing creates what the text calls the sorry mess of self.
That's a great phrase, the sorry mess.
Love.
We build a concept of self based entirely on dualistic labels that are, at their core, meaningless.
We say things like, I am smart, not stupid. I am a success, not a failure.
And we build our entire identity out of these fragile binary constructs. Then we spend our whole lives trying to extract our self-worth from this unstable mess.
It's like trying to draw clean water from a poisoned well. We build this house of cards, we slap our name on it, and then we desperately defend it. And the harder we defend it, the more divided we become.
Which is the true descent.
Right, this is the complete failure of our standard operating procedures. And this brings us to the actual beginning of the ordeal. The night kicks off with this crushing realization. You realize that at the heart of your suffering is yourself.
It forces a level of absolute accountability that the ego just vehemently rejects.
Vehemently.
The text describes this phase as a tedious process of unremitting inner strife. And I think the word tedious is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
Oh, for sure. We love to romanticize the dark night as this cinematic, glamorous battle between light and dark.
Like a movie climax.
Yeah.
But it isn't. It's grinding, it's exhausting, it's a repetitive inner conflict. And the default setting for the human ego in this state is to immediately project outward.
Blame everyone else.
Right. When life gets difficult, the reflex is to adopt the mantle of the victim.
I do want to push back slightly here, though, or just play devil's advocate for a second. The document goes a step further and says we oscillate between anger and victimhood, but that we actually enjoy the self-destructive qualities of both.
It's a harsh word. Enjoy.
It is, because I don't think anyone actively wants to feel the pain of a depressive spiral or a fit of rage. How do we justify calling that enjoyment?
It is profoundly uncomfortable to admit, but there is a psychological payoff, a secondary game to these states.
Like what?
Well, think about the physical sensation of righteous anger. It feels powerful, it's highly energizing, it floods your nervous system with adrenaline and gives you a false sense of control.
You feel morally superior.
Exactly. And on the flip side, victimhood offers a very dark, heavy comfort. It's a warm blanket because it totally absolves you of responsibility.
If it's all someone else's fault, I don't have to fix it.
Right. It demands sympathy from the outside world and gives you an ironclad excuse not to move forward. We consume our own suffering because the friction of that conflict reminds the ego that it exists. It reinforces those dualistic boundaries we just talked about.
Okay, that makes a terrifying amount of sense when you frame it around the ego needing to feel relevant. But breaking that cycle is incredibly messy.
It's awful.
Because when the rational coping mechanisms completely fail and you start to realize you are the source of the pain, you don't just gracefully sit down and accept it. The text describes this regression that happens next, and it is almost embarrassing.
The infantile consciousness.
Exactly. The frustration brings back the inner toddler. We fully regress.
We find ourselves in these states of pure rage. The text says we despise others and foster deep, dark hatreds. The toddler takes over the control room.
Because the ruach, the intellectual soul, can't mediate anymore.
The satisfactory model has collapsed. We lose all access to adult emotional regulation. We stomp our feet, and we hate the universe for not giving us what we want the exact second we want it.
It's exactly the feeling you get when your Wi-Fi drops during a really important video call. For a split second, you aren't a rational adult who understands local infrastructure issues.
You're a toddler trapped in an adult body wanting to smash the router with a hammer.
Yes, but in the dark night, this isn't just a 5-minute bad mood over internet speeds. These dark hatreds can escalate into numbing doubts, complete paralysis, or even a total break from reality.
Psychosis, essentially.
So if we're stuck in the nursery with this tantruming inner toddler, what is the alchemical response? How do we deal with this inner mess?
The stance required here is very specific and highly counterintuitive. You can't run from the tantrum. You have to turn around, face this mess of memories, and unpick the very constituents of your being.
And the tools the text says are required for this are absolute fearlessness, overarching curiosity, and a genuine dislike for self.
That last one is the kicker.
It really is. A genuine dislike for self runs completely counter to the modern cultural narrative. We are constantly preaching self-love, self-care, accepting yourself exactly as you are. How does disliking yourself lead to fearlessness?
We have to clarify what self means in this esoteric context. It does not mean your core authentic being. The self you must genuinely dislike is that sorry mess we talked about earlier.
The dualistic ego.
Exactly. The artificial construct,
Yeah.
the mask that is currently shattering. If you are deeply attached to your ego, if you constantly practice self-love towards your own neuroses and your own false labels, you will never let that mask shatter.
You'll just defend the toddler's right to scream.
You have to be thoroughly disgusted with the artificial constraints of your ego to have the courage to dismantle it.
That completely flips the script. It isn't about self-hatred at all. It's about being allergic to your own artificiality. And that pairs perfectly with the overarching curiosity. Instead of judging the inner toddler or trying to logically silence it, you become intensely, almost scientifically curious about it. Why is it screaming? What underlying memory is feeding the tantrum?
And the main barrier to this whole process is just the fear of loss. The most challenging times are when we refuse to accept an aspect of ourselves because we fear losing it.
We cling to the anger because it's familiar architecture.
We're terrified of the empty space. We think if we unpick the ego, there will be nothing left.
Which brings us to a massive philosophical pivot in this framework. To help us understand the nature of what we are actually fighting in that empty space, the document introduces a truly mind-bending thought experiment.
The elephant mountain.
Yes. It asks us to consider the difference between what is existent and what is manifest. And I love this analogy. So imagine you are looking at a mountain, and the ridges and the shadows on this mountain make it look exactly like an elephant.
Sound trick of the light.
Right. Now, the mountain itself exists. It is real in a conventional physical sense. It has mass, it takes up space, you can hike up it and touch the rocks. The mountain is existent.
But the critical question is there an existent elephant?
Exactly. And the answer is no. There is no biological flesh and blood elephant standing on the horizon. There is just a pattern, a shape of rocks and shadows that your brain recognizes and slaps the label elephant onto.
So the elephant is manifest, but it is not existent.
Right. It appears to our perception, we can point to it, we can name it, but it has no independent reality.
This is such a profound psychological tool when you apply it internally, because the human brain is just a pattern recognition machine. We experience pareidolia, constantly seeing faces in the clouds or the toast, because our brains are desperate to organize chaotic data into recognizable forms.
And the alchemical framework takes this cognitive quirk and applies it to the occult concept of a creature.
Right. In alchemical terms, a creature is defined as a product of differentiation. It's taking a unified whole, the pleroma, and breaking it down into multiplicitous parts.
To put that in highly practical terms for the listener, a creature is really just a label. It's the label we give to a pattern that we expect has some degree of autonomy. We see a shape, we label it a creature.
And there is a fascinating observation in the text about how our perception filters these creatures. We only tend to notice the things that impact our immediate survival.
Right. Things our size, things we eat, or things that can eat us.
It's the ultimate evolutionary filter. If a pattern is a threat or a resource, it becomes highly manifest to us. But the analogy expands beautifully here. It asks us to consider just a single tree or a shovel full of earth.
I love this part.
Within that single shovelful of dirt, there are entire kingdoms of hidden creatures. Microbes, nematodes, massive fungal networks. They absolutely exist.
But because they are irrelevant to our daily survival, they remain completely hidden.
Right. We have no use for them. They have no use for us. So they are existent, but to our perception, they are completely unmanifest.
That shovelful of dirt analogy is so grounding. Because if there are entire invisible kingdoms thriving in a handful of physical earth, what unmanifested kingdoms exist in the soil of our own subconscious minds?
The staggering thought.
What aspects of our own nature are we completely blind to simply because our stressed-out middle manager ego hasn't found a use for them?
And this concept of the manifest versus the existent perfectly sets the stage for redefining the most misunderstood element of the Dark Knight.
Inner demons.
Right. Because the word demon carries immense cultural baggage. It evokes medieval superstitions and Hollywood exorcism movies.
Moral panic.
Exactly. Even the document acknowledges that the idea is strangely repulsive to people. Clergy hesitate to discuss them due to a kind of moral ignorance.
We ignore the mechanics of how negative inner forces are created, and by doing so, we just allow them to multiply. So we really have to strip away the Hollywood baggage here. What exactly is a demon in this alchemical framework?
It ties right back to that habit of the unenlightened mind we were just discussing, the tendency to lump experiences together to create a sense of self.
We take a memory, an urge, a social reaction, and we lump them together and call it me.
And here is where the splitting of the self becomes highly dangerous. As we go through life, we inevitably experience things we don't like. Traumas, unacceptable urges, deep, profound shames.
Things we do not want on our public resume.
Exactly. We don't want these to be part of the dominant personality we present to the world, so we reject them. We aggressively deny them.
But those denied experiences don't just evaporate.
No, they don't. Because our mind's default habit is to lump things together, these orphaned experiences find each other in the dark. They lump themselves together into subpersonalities of increasing manifest reality.
Subpersonalities of increasing manifest reality. That is a deeply unsettling way to reframe how our minds compartmentalize trauma. You shove your anger down into the basement, and it doesn't just sit in a box. It starts building a body out of other rejected memories.
The parts we like become the dominant personality, and the parts we reject become our shadow. And these rejected subpersonalities actually become the demonic forces.
So they are the elephant on the mountain.
Yes. These demonic forces, let's say a sudden, overwhelming urge of destructive anger, they're manifest. They appear as very real urges, intrusive thoughts, skewed perceptions.
They can give you a literal panic attack, make your heart race, make your palms sweat.
They feel entirely real. But in truth, they do not exist as independent, autonomous entities. They are just the shape the rocks and shadows are taking on the mountain of your own psyche.
This is a heavy paradox to hold. The text advises that the best way to handle this is to accept that they are both real and not real simultaneously.
It's not easy.
I'm not gonna lie, it sounds incredibly difficult to practice in the moment. When you are gripped by a severe depressive spiral, telling yourself, well, this is real but also not real, it feels like a very tall order.
It is a tall order. But failing to grasp this paradox is incredibly dangerous. The mechanism of denial is what actually gives the demon its power.
Explain that.
If we refuse to accept that we have a problem with, say, lust or anger, then we find we get lusty or angry demons. By pretending the problem doesn't exist within us, we guarantee it will torment us.
The repressed energy has to go somewhere.
Right, so it manifests as an autonomous force that feels like it's possessing us from the outside.
It's a vicious cycle. You deny the anger lumps into an anger demon, the demon torments you with angry urges, and if you keep pretending the problem isn't yours, you stay tormented.
And if you snap and give in to the demon, you do real-world harm.
There's actually a brief detour the source material takes here that I find fascinating. It mentions that there is this deep, esoteric path of occult study. The path of the dragon, studying the Qliphoth, and these massive hierarchies of demons.
The really dense occult lore.
Right. But the text explicitly says that for the alchemist, this kind of external occult knowledge is probably unnecessary.
It's a brilliant redirection by the author. It's basically saying, look, you can spend 20 years in a library reading ancient grimoires, memorizing the names of Mesopotamian underworld deities, but it will not save you.
It's avoiding the actual work.
Exactly. The real work isn't academic demonology. It's intensely personal psychology. You don't need to know the true name of a 14th century demon. You need to know the true name of your own rejected envy.
Outward projection is just another trick of the ego to avoid taking responsibility?
Yes. The demons are us. They are our own orphaned, discarded pieces.
Which brings us to the actual methodology of healing, alchemical integration. If we know what they are, how do we deal with them? The instruction is to recognize our own demons and approach them with love and curiosity, wishing them to become integrated.
But we really need to pause on the word love here.
Yeah, because modern therapy language might totally misinterpret this.
It is critical to differentiate alchemical love from indulgence. The framework explicitly states that we are not interested in cherishing and supporting their individuality. We are not looking for gifts.
This is a direct critique of that modern tendency to adopt our trauma as an identity.
Precisely. You hear people say, well, my anxiety makes me more empathetic, or my anger is just part of my fiery personality.
That is cherishing the demon?
It supports its individuality. It keeps the elephant totally separate from the mountain.
Right. You aren't trying to negotiate a peace treaty with a separate sovereign nation. You are trying to dissolve the border entirely. You approach with love-meaning radical acceptance without judgment and curiosity, with the sole intention of bringing that exiled energy back into the unified whole.
You don't buy the tantruming inner toddler a toy to shut it up, but you also don't lock it in a closet.
You just hold it and observe the raw energy behind the outburst.
And this integration is a progressive descent. It's a step-by-step process. You start small. You recognize your superficial ego defenses first, the deceitful speech, the little white lies you tell to maintain that satisfactory model of existence.
And once you integrate those, the water gets much deeper.
You move on to the heavier issues: lust, envy. And finally, the text brings us to the very bottom of the descent, the deepest issue of all: treachery.
Treachery. That word carries so much weight, it implies a betrayal. And this leads to the darkest, most profound realization of the entire Dark Knight framework. The text states that only when one recognizes that the most terrible being in our mental schema has to be, and always had been, ourself, can we fully identify with our own inner darkness.
This is the ultimate confrontation. Throughout this entire descent, the ego has been frantically looking for an external enemy.
It blamed the traffic, it blamed the boss, it blamed autonomous demons.
But at the absolute rock bottom, you realize that the architect of the nightmare is you. The ultimate source of the division, the denial, and the suffering is the core mechanism of your own false identity.
It's terrifying to embrace that, to accept that you are the monster in the dark. But the framework promises that bringing this all together is what heals all.
Because when you accept that you are both the worst and the best, you are finally unified.
You are at the absolute lowest state of being, but for the first time you're whole. And it's at this rock bottom that we confront what the text calls our most terrible sin, the betrayal of being.
The betrayal of being is a fascinating concept. Because it has nothing to do with moral failings in the traditional sense.
It's not about stealing or lying.
No. The betrayal happens when the false and empty simulacrum takes residence in the mind through the simple act of naming.
Let's translate that into modern terms for a second. What is a simulacrum? In philosophy, it's a copy without an original. It's an image that completely replaces reality.
Right.
In our daily lives, it's like spending so much time curating your Instagram profile that you actually forget who you are when the phone is turned off. You mistake the digital avatar for your actual soul.
That is the perfect modern equivalent. And how does that avatar take residence in the mind? Through the act of naming.
The labels.
When we say to ourselves, I am an angry person, or I am a broken person, or even I am a successful person, we are committing the act of naming. We are creating a static, dualistic label, the simulacrum, and allowing it to usurp the fluid, unified reality of our true being.
That shattered mask we visualized at the beginning of the deep dive, that mask is the simulacrum.
Exactly. The betrayal of being is forgetting that you are the vast, turbulent cosmic sea and firmly believing you are just one jagged, isolated shard of that broken mask.
It's such a profound paradigm shift. The sin isn't a bad deed. The sin is a false claim of identity.
Yes.
Which brings us to the climax of the journey. We are at the absolute bottom. We have recognized the simulacrum. We've admitted our betrayal of being. The mask is shattered. What happens in that empty space?
At the peak of the Dark Knight, we recognize that the simulacrum is utterly empty. All those terrifying demons, all those rigid labels, the dualistic judgments, when you look at them with that fearless curiosity, they are revealed to have absolutely zero substance.
They are manifest, but they aren't existent.
They're just a composite of duality that suddenly fuses into a single moment of what the framework calls empty unity.
Empty unity. The document goes on to describe this as having neither a center nor an edge. What does that actually feel like? Because I imagine a center or an edge requires a boundary.
It requires an inside and an outside.
a me versus the world, but when the false self shatters, those borders completely collapse. There is no central ego left to defend, and there's no edge where I end and the universe begins.
It is a deeply mystical state, and it marks the exact breakthrough moment. But notice the required sequence here. It only happens when all hope is lost.
You have to stop hoping that your rational mind will eventually solve the math problem of your suffering.
You have to stop hoping your ego can be salvaged and polished up. You have to completely, utterly surrender. And in that total letting go, transcendental awareness manifests.
I really love how pragmatic the framework is about this moment, too. It doesn't promise a fairy tale ending where a magic wand is waved and you just never feel sad again.
No, it cautions that while this moment of awakening might be incredibly obvious, your worldly suffering doesn't instantly abate.
Your external circumstances haven't magically changed. You still have to pay rent.
Right. But something fundamental, something structural, has shifted internally. The perspective has entirely changed.
The text describes it as the moment where the rays of the dawning sun suddenly bring the hope one so longed for.
The author elevates this resolution, comparing it to the Buddhist concept of satori, a sudden intuitive awakening to one's true nature, or the alchemical opus magnum, the great work.
The successful transmutation of base matter into the philosopher's stone.
The resolution of the Dark Night isn't just feeling a little bit better on a Tuesday. It is achieving the highest goal of the esoteric traditions.
And then comes the grand reveal, the ultimate realization that completely recontextualizes the entire painful journey. We discovered that the darkness we feared so much was merely the shadow cast by our own light.
It is a staggering realization. The darkness wasn't an invading demonic army. It was a byproduct of our own existence.
Because if our true nature is the light of consciousness, the rigid ego structure we built around ourselves blocked that light. It cast long, terrifying shadows.
We spent the entire night running from the shadow of our own architecture.
The journey through the night, as harrowing as it was, reveals itself as the only necessary path to wholeness. As the dawn breaks, we finally understand that the demons we fought were never enemies.
They were just orphaned aspects of ourselves crying out in the dark, desperately seeking integration.
The darkness wasn't a trap. It was the very ground of our awakening. The monster guarding the gate is the gate.
It's a masterful synthesis of ideas, from Freud's divided ego and the Kabbalah's fragmented soul to the cognitive illusion of the Elephant Mountain. We realize that the entire agonizing process of the Dark Night is simply the necessary mechanics of tearing down the false simulacrum so the true, unified self can breathe.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, there is a final, incredibly brief piece of text provided in the source document. It's a quote from the 13th century Persian mystic Rumi. It simply reads, "These pains you feel are messengers. Listen to them."
It retroactively reframes every single moment of suffering we've discussed today.
The anxiety, the rage, the numbing doubts.
They were never meant to be medicated away, suppressed, or outsmarted by the rational mind. They were messengers knocking on the door of our consciousness, holding the shattered, rejected pieces of our authentic self.
If we shoot the messenger, we remain fragmented.
If we listen to them with fearless curiosity, we achieve the opus magnum.
Listen to them. It sounds so simple, but as we've seen, it requires the total collapse of the ego to actually pull it off. We have covered incredibly dense territory today.
We really have.
We started with our intrinsic division, navigated the tantrums of our inner frustration, and learned to spot the elephant on the mountain to realize our fears are manifest but not existent. We redefined our demons as orphaned parts of our psyche and witnessed how the shattering of the false simulacrum allows true awareness to break through.
The framework doesn't sugarcoat the descent. It honors the absolute dread of the Dark Night. But it provides a map that is profoundly hopeful. The darkness is an alchemical crucible designed to burn away everything that isn't real.
And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you step back into your day. Think back to that brilliant analogy of the shovelful of earth.
The hidden kingdoms.
Right. We talked about how in just one handful of dirt, there are entire kingdoms of hidden creatures that exist but remain entirely unmanifested to us simply because we have no use for them.
We applied this to the monstrous parts of ourselves, the demons we actively suppress because they threaten our ego.
But what about the neutral or even the positive parts? If your subconscious is as vast and thickly populated as that soil, what unseen, unmanifested aspects of your own nature are quietly thriving in the deep soil of your mind right now?
That's a great question.
What unique talents, what unorthodox perspectives, what immense capacities for joy or profound peace are entirely hidden from you, not because they're scary, but simply because the rigid, stressed-out ego managing your daily schedule hasn't yet found a use for them.
The unmanifested light.
Exactly. What might manifest in your life if you approached your own hidden depths, not just with a readiness to fight demons, but with a radical, overarching curiosity about what else is quietly living in the dark soil of your own being. Keep diving deep.